Welcome to the Executive Innovation Show podcast, where we bring you real executive conversations with industry game changers and thought leaders. We ask the questions you're thinking, what you're scared to ask, and we make your brain hurt afterward. With your host, Carrie Jitsi Wells, co-founder and CEO of One Touch Video Chat, live video interviews, and the nonprofit Humans Helping Humans.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining today's podcast. We're going to talk about the future in online behavioral therapy programs. And so happy to have with me my co-host, Daniel Miller, who is the executive director of the nonprofit Humans Helping Humans. And we have an awesome guest as well. Daniel, welcome to another awesome podcast.
Yep. Thanks, Gary. Happy to be here.
Great. And our guest today is Dale Cook, who is the co-founder and CEO of Learn to Live, an engagement and consumer-driven healthcare company that provides coach-supported digital cognitive behavioral therapy programs for people suffering with mental health problems. Dale's also been recognized as one of the Power 50 in healthcare in the Minneapolis, or actually Minnesota, right? Business Magazine, and has been awarded the Leader in Healthcare Innovation in 2017. You might have also seen him in national publications like Forbes and Oprah Magazine. Dale, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, awesome. Learn to Live is doing some amazing things, and we love when we're talking to folks in mental health and also nonprofits, which I know you're not a nonprofit, but now that you're paving some amazing way in mental health, love to hear the backstory a little bit of why you started Learn to Live.
You know, it really started with, I would say, a clinician's concern. So my co-founder, Dr. Russ Morfitt, who's our chief psychology officer, he spent over 2 decades working with underserved populations here in Minnesota. And he saw firsthand that many clients had to deal with extensive wait times, sometimes lengthy travel requirements, and really struggled sometimes with the stigma that prevents access in so many cases. And so he spent years researching the internet-delivered version of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and began to develop the first of what is now a suite of these digital CBT programs. So fast forward to our partnership, he reached out to me to seek my help in thinking through how to operationalize this idea to get this mission to millions and millions of people, to these silent sufferers who won't otherwise seek face-to-face therapy. And that's really how I got involved. And then we launched our first online program back in 2013, along with some other services. And we're fortunate now to cover over 2 million lives.
That's amazing. There's been a lot of, and you've probably seen this, and, at the industry as a whole, there's been a lot of talk on, where the role is for health plans, employers, institutions, universities, school districts, things like that of, with mental health awareness and even towns, cities, rural areas really investing more in education that mental health is health, and employers recognizing that, the livelihood of employees, having good mental health and seeking help has become more and more of a priority. Since you guys have been doing this for quite some time, how have you seen that particularly change over the last few years?
I would say the change has been substantial. I think, both in terms of greater awareness of the problems around mental health and also greater awareness of the different kinds of solutions that organizations can think about to effectively address it now. And also, I think the appetite for organizations to invest in this kind of help is very different. We can all look around, see articles almost every day, right, about mental health for various populations and how debilitating that can be. And in the last few years, there's been a big shift, particularly with health plans and employers who are feeling that financial pain also of mental health problems. In fact, you maybe know the statistic, but mental health problems cost companies and organizations in the United States almost $200 billion in lost earning every year. And depression continues to be the leading cause of disability worldwide. And so the pain is there. The awareness of groups like ours that provide online CBT, which is very evidence-based, is much greater. 3 years ago, we spent a lot of time trying to educate about online CBT, and now it's really most of the organizations we work with know about online CBT. It's more a question of how do we partner and what is their appetite for doing that.
That's great. And, Dale, a minute ago, you mentioned a term that piqued my interest. The term was silent sufferers. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by silent sufferers? And then along that same line, the demographics and social classes, does that contribute to more of the silent sufferers having some problems?
The term silent sufferers for us is powerful because, more broadly, what we mean by that is almost half of the people in the United States who have a mental health problem. Of those, only 1 in 4 will seek out face-to-face therapy. So you have really over 100 million people in this country alone who at some point in their lives will have a mental health problem, but sadly won't feel comfortable or won't be able to seek out face-to-face therapy because of social stigma or access or cost concerns. Mm-hmm. And so we consider them suffering in silence. So they're not getting help, and yet they're not really popping up on the radar screens of primary care or other providers. And these silent sufferers really come to your other question, come from all walks of life and socioeconomic backgrounds. And so, unfortunately, women are about twice as likely to suffer from anxiety or depression. We see that teens and young adults, including college students, which is a part of a group that we serve, are much more likely to suffer than past generations. And a couple of other groups too. I think we talk about socioeconomic backgrounds or social determinants of health. When some of those things are lacking, access to education, access to healthcare, that can impact mental health. And then finally, the senior population. So we're seeing, unfortunately, large trends in isolation, trends in depression that hit, the group that are age 65 and older. And so it really, unfortunately, cuts across a pretty wide swath of people.
So obviously it's affecting every demographic, and, mental health is health. You talked a little about the college, and we talk a lot about the youth demographics. So we've been going back to, talking more middle school and high school. Social media has made this best life forward and taking, 100 selfies to put that one best picture on there. And this has really caused a rise in depression, anxiety for that youth demographic. What are you seeing in regards to the youth demographic and school districts, colleges, whatever it may be, as a lot of times parents think that mental health is being discussed at school. Schools think that it's the parents' position to have those conversations. Are you seeing an increase in the youth demographic from the CBT standpoint, or what effects are you seeing from the social media, the increase in social media?
We're really seeing, I would say, an increase in both in terms of, use in the teen kind of, late teen, early 20s demographic, and even the high school age, both in terms of use and in terms of social media impact. So, you talk about this best life forward concept and some of the pressures that teenagers are feeling. And it's certainly, the data is a little new, it's a little early, but certainly while it's not impacting all young people, it's certainly impacting anxiety and depression for some. And, as we know, those who are younger tend to give into that temptation to compare themselves to other people, at greater scale, or envy the lives of others in this best life forward concept, or at least the lives that are portrayed, right. In social media. And I think to your other point, there is much greater awareness and greater activity on behalf of parents, by parents in schools. So as we think about high school districts, traditionally we've served health plans, employers, higher education institutions, but now this year, actually, we're moving into high school districts. And part of that is driven by parents becoming much more involved, becoming more aware of some of the impacts either of social media or just the impacts of mental health problems with their teenagers in general. And they're partnering very closely with their schools to raise their hands and say, what can we do? Are there opportunities out there for more creative but highly clinically appropriate interventions that we can leverage here that maybe even are digital forward, that our teenagers, these internet natives are more accustomed to using. And certainly there's a trend in moving in that direction for solutions like ours to play a bigger role with teenagers.
That's really fantastic. And there's a lot of different reasons, and we've talked about some of those, reasons that people don't seek treatment for mental health. Some of that has to do with the social stigma that we talked about, the costs, access to care, and so forth. How have the online courses that Learn to Live has developed, how have they really addressed the care now for rural demographics or demographics that wouldn't necessarily reach out to a professional?
I think part of it is what you mentioned. Our programs and services are accessible anywhere, anytime, on any device. So an individual, for example, in a small town without access to an evidence-based psychologist or a single mother working a couple of jobs can access our programs when it's convenient for them, even in the middle of the night. So some companies do, for example, product releases in the middle of the night. We don't do that because we have a lot of people online using our programs. And so in some cases, it's really anyone who's too busy during the day or isn't able to drive to an appointment back, or perhaps too embarrassed to ask for time off, or certainly geographically challenged in rural locations, is not going to pursue traditional therapy. And so we can offer these online, self-paced programs, but also we have coaching services available by phone, by text, by email. And so again, that's something that individuals can access anywhere.
That's great. And with our busy, as you said earlier, digital first, with our busy digital life, the industry as a whole, I think we're going to see a lot of progression in really being able to virtually get help, virtually be able to use tools like yours and others to really engage and, reach that 90+% demographic that's not going to reach out to a clinical professional. As your members, you mentioned earlier, 2 million members, congratulations. That's amazing. As you look at those members, and I know you guys have different courses and it probably varies, but tell us a little bit, how long is the courses? How often do people engage? Walk us through a little bit of what you're seeing from that standpoint.
Each of our programs, and we currently offer programs for depression, anxiety, social anxiety, and insomnia. Each of those programs includes 8 lessons, and they're specifically designed with the recognition that most users will not use all 8 lessons. As you probably know, the modal number of sessions in-person therapy is 1, and early online CBT followed this pattern. And so what we've done is we've built the most potent tools into the early lessons. And if we look at you asked about kind of how our members progress or how they do, on average, our coach members, for example, engage in 4 to 5 lessons. But we also sometimes see members who've been inactive for a time, come back and they resume services. Sometimes they shift to another program. More than 10% of our members use more than one program, which is gratifying to us because we know that many people are challenged by more than one of these difficulties. And it shows us how much they trust us to help, at least from our perspective. But the idea that someone would engage with us, 4 or 5 minutes at a time has great impact on how we build that content, because what we want to do is provide someone with a very readily available, usable tool for dealing with their anxiety or their depression every 4 or 5 minutes. So in that short snippet of time, get something valuable, they can turn around and apply that to their day-to-day life, see value in that, and that gets them to come back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Pivoting a little bit over to what CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is, could you tell everybody that doesn't know the philosophy and techniques behind the CBT and why it's so effective for mental health?
Sure. CBT is really what I would say is a set of powerful tools that can help people get past problems such as anxiety or depression. And years of clinical research have made it really the most proven model for these kinds of challenges. And CBT is really based on the understanding that our thoughts about situations, for example, can really create our emotions, and it's not the situations themselves. And so we can get past depression, stress, and anxiety when we learn to modify our thoughts, how we're thinking about these situations, and then really harness our behavior patterns that keep us stuck and learn new behaviors to get us out of that. And that last part about leveraging these patterns is really the most powerful part. And quite often in other forms of treatment for mental health, sadly, that last part about behavior is what's omitted. And so the studies around computerized or digital or online CBT show that it can be as effective as in-person therapy with the same long-lasting effects. And that's really not surprising because these same tools learned in the therapy office can be presented, expertly if it's done right, expertly online, and they're always consistently delivered, and they can be reviewed and practiced and re-reviewed by members at any time.
So are they, for folks that are going and seeing a therapist or psychologist and so forth, do you know what, and you may not know this number, but what percentage of therapists, given that mental health has the highest no-show rate, upwards of 35%, because you're supposed to, go every week or whatever it may be, depending upon what your plan is. What percentage or how many therapists are using CBT in conjunction with traditional therapy? Are there groups of folks that are doing the traditional therapy and you go home and do CBT online, or where's the CBT kind of online with the traditional four-wall setting? How's that historically or currently being used? I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. We're not aware of any, let's say national studies that sort of compare the connection between the two. Certainly we look at that very closely with our membership, and there's a pretty meaningful percentage, probably 30% of our members that will either experience some success with our program and decide that they want to then go in and meet someone and find a way to do that, and then continue with our program as what we would say adjunct to the face-to-face therapy, which can become very effective. And then certainly we see others who may be determined, they have a higher complexity issue has some comorbidity with, say, their depression, which helps get them in. And so once again, they're using our services in conjunction with that. But I think, for us, approximately 82% of our members, give or take, have either never been in therapy or not been in therapy in the past year. And so, and they continue with us really as that first line intervention. So I think for us, the power of online CBT is that it really can fit the needs for those who either may not have access or may not wish to seek out traditional treatment, but it can also be sort of a doorway to get them into face-to-face, or it can be used as an adjunct. And we see, for example, at the University of Minnesota, one of our clients, it's not uncommon for students to bring their Learn to Live, online homework assignments in to the counseling center to say, "Oh, I've been learning about the sphere facing. I'd love to meet with a counselor because I want to dive a little deeper." So I'm not sure if that entirely answered your question.
No, that did.
But certainly, we would say probably any treatment option does not exist in isolation, and so it's important for groups like us to be able to integrate kind of across the mental health care continuum.
So you mentioned earlier that you're seeing kind of a rise in seniors, and there's a lot going on with aging seniors at home, and the whole healthcare around baby boomers. And then we have our millennials that are now in their 20s that for the most part are out of college or last year and now in the workplace, and millennials account for 75% of the workplace next year. And then we have Gen Zs that are video first calling demographics that are a little bit different in their communication trends than millennials that are more of an online and kind of texting demographic. With the generations shifting and as mental health continues to rise, as we have, a major opioid crisis in the U.S., where do you see this going with mental health over the next couple of years? And really, where do you see it going with the traditional 4-wall model versus digital versus video? Like, how do we reach more people from a mental health standpoint using technology and then, still having either the human interaction, the, CBT and other tools to reach more people, since there's not many people, if you look at the grand scheme of things, there's not many people reaching out for help, right? And
right.
In a traditional model, right? So where do you, where do you see that headed?
Certainly, there is consolidation happening, and I think we'll continue to see that in the space to, combine services into something, as cohesive and comprehensive as possible. I think you mentioned, we talked about, some people, will seek out the face-to-face. Some will do something else and then be comfortable with face-to-face or somehow gain access. Some will never be comfortable with that. Some will be comfortable with, say, telemedicine, right, or telepsychiatry. And so I think because, as we mentioned, mental health problems rarely exist in isolation, and likewise, people will seek out different forms. I think, medicine, therapies, devices, even wearables, which are really, coming more to the fore and starting to get studied by regulatory bodies. All of these groups need to work together, I think, to drive, meaningful change. And most importantly, like we like to say, kind of meet sufferers where they are, because just like in other aspects of healthcare or nutrition or fitness, all of us have different ways of getting our needs met. And so I think we as sort of a mental health care group or industry need to always consider how people want to access things differently, but also make sure that however we're doing it, that it's evidence-based, that we're making the user experience in our case as seamless as possible, and that we're also aware of how we fit in. Because I think, again, that consolidation is going to continue to happen. And the groups that are going to really help people most effectively are going to be groups that can fit in to fit in and work together with these other players, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, Dale, we really appreciate you being on the show. It has been a great conversation. To learn more about Learn to Live, click on the link in the show notes or go to learntolive.com to learn more about humans helping humans. Click on the link or go to helpinghumans.care. Daniel, thanks for co-hosting. Dale, thanks for being on the show today. We really appreciate it, and we'll be following your journey, and really appreciate you guys doing everything for this 2 million members and raising awareness on mental health.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dale.
This podcast has come to a close. To hear more from the Executive Innovation Show podcast, subscribe, submit questions, and share the love. Follow us on social. We're everywhere.